It started with a small act of thoughtfulness, a Christmas gift I thought my youngest daughter, Elizabeth, would enjoy. She had always shown an interest in genealogy, so I ordered a DNA test for her. I thought it would be a fun way for her to explore her heritage and perhaps spark conversations about family history. Little did I know that this seemingly innocent gift would dismantle everything I believed about my life and family. The revelation came in the form of a phone call. 7 weeks after Elizabeth had taken the test, I contacted the company to figure out why her results hadn't appeared. After a few minutes on hold, the representative explained that the test had been processed but couldn't provide any further details due to confidentiality agreements. When I asked why my daughter didn't show up in my DNA matches, his evasive response left little doubt about the truth. The silence that followed was deafening. My mind raced to connect the dots. My stomach churned as I realized the only logical explanation: Elizabeth wasn't biologically mine. I hung up the phone, my hands trembling, and stared into the void of my family room. My daughter, the child I had raised and adored for 23 years, was not my biological child. The weight of the revelation left me curled on the couch in tears. When I called Elizabeth during her lunch break, she picked up on the first ring, her voice filled with hesitation. "I know, Dad," she said, her words heavy with emotion. "We need to talk, but not now. Call me tonight when Mom isn't around." The rest of my day passed in a haze. As the vice president of engineering for a successful company, I was used to solving complex problems. But no amount of analytical thinking could prepare me for the turmoil I felt inside. I couldn't focus on work, and my mind kept circling back to one question: how could this have happened? My wife, Patricia, and I had built a life that, from the outside, seemed ideal. We met in college, married shortly after graduation, and raised 3 incredible children together. Over the years, we supported each other through career advancements, family milestones, and the ups and downs of parenting. Our youngest, Elizabeth, had always been my little pumpkin, her laughter lighting up every room. Now, a shadow had been cast over it all. When I finally spoke to Elizabeth that evening, she confirmed my worst fears. "Dad," she whispered through sobs, "the DNA test revealed that Caroline Barker is my half-sister." Caroline Barker, Judge Lester Barker's daughter. The man my children knew as Uncle Lester. The man who had been my wife's boss decades ago. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Lester and Patricia had been more than colleagues. Their close family friendship had hidden a deeper betrayal. I had trusted them both implicitly. We had vacationed together, spent holidays as families, and shared countless memories. While I was busy building a life for my family, they were building something else behind my back. The affair wasn't just a fleeting mistake, it had lasted years. Elizabeth's existence was proof of their deceit, yet Patricia had kept the secret buried for decades. I couldn't decide what hurt more, the betrayal itself or the realization that I had been living a lie. After the phone call with Elizabeth, the truth began to unravel. Each revelation was a devastating blow. Elizabeth wasn't biologically mine, and her father was none other than Lester Barker, a man I had once considered a close friend. Patricia, my wife of 3 decades, had hidden this betrayal from me for over 20 years. The life I thought I knew was a carefully maintained illusion. The affair wasn't just a momentary lapse, it had lasted for years. Patricia had been involved with Lester when she worked as his assistant at the law firm, a time I had assumed we were building a life of trust and love. Not only had she deceived me, but she had also raised another man's child alongside me, all the while keeping me in the dark. I couldn't stop replaying the years in my mind, searching for signs I had missed. Lester and his wife, Margaret, had been a fixture in our lives. They weren't just colleagues, they were family friends. We had vacationed together, celebrated milestones, and raised our children side by side. I remembered the trips Patricia took with the kids to their lake house when I was away on business. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now, those memories felt like cruel reminders of how thoroughly I had been deceived. For a week, I waited to see if Patricia would come clean on her own. She didn't. Her behavior suggested she knew the truth was out, yet she remained silent. The tension between us was palpable. The woman I had once adored seemed like a stranger now, her every gesture tainted by the knowledge of what she had done. When the silence became unbearable, I took action. I consulted an attorney, outlining the details of the affair and my intentions to end the marriage. My lawyer explained the legal steps involved, emphasizing the importance of fairness in dividing assets. But this wasn't just about money or property, it was about dignity and respect, both of which Patricia had stripped from me. At home, the atmosphere was colder than ever. Patricia busied herself with mundane tasks, perhaps hoping that by pretending everything was normal, she could postpone the inevitable. But there was no going back. The weight of her betrayal loomed over every interaction, every shared meal, every passing glance. Finally, I decided to confront her. On a quiet Saturday evening, after a pleasant dinner, I told her we needed to talk. She didn't deny the affair or Elizabeth's paternity. Instead, she tried to dismiss it as a long-buried mistake, something that shouldn't matter anymore. But it did matter. It wasn't just about the act of infidelity, it was the years of lies and deceit that followed. Patricia's attempt to minimize her betrayal only deepened my resentment. She had made a choice, not just in being with Lester but in concealing the truth and robbing me of the chance to make my own decisions. As I pieced together the timeline, I realized that the affair had ended not because of her remorse, but because Lester had moved on to further his career. Patricia had stayed with me, not out of love, but because I was the dependable option. I wasn't her first choice, I was her backup. This realization cut deeper than anything else. I had built my life around her, trusted her completely, and idolized her as my partner and soulmate. Now, that foundation was shattered. The woman I thought I knew had been living a double life, and I couldn't ignore the betrayal. Patricia's attempts to mend the relationship felt hollow. She made grand gestures, cooking elaborate meals, reminiscing about our past, and avoiding any mention of Lester. But none of it could erase the truth. Her actions were rooted in fear of losing the life she had built, not in genuine remorse. The turning point came when Patricia involved our children. Hugo, our eldest, called me at work, pleading for me to reconsider the divorce. He painted the affair as a mistake, something that happened long ago and didn't deserve to destroy our family now. But Hugo's words only solidified my resolve. Patricia's betrayal wasn't just a moment in time, it was a choice she made repeatedly, and it had altered the course of our lives. By involving our children, she was manipulating them to shield herself from accountability. The day Patricia was served with divorce papers was a sobering moment. Watching her receive the envelope, her shoulders slumping as she realized what was happening, brought a mix of sadness and relief. She retreated upstairs without a word, leaving me alone to process the finality of it all. The next morning, I left the house early, unable to bear the suffocating atmosphere. My destination was Lester's home, where I intended to confront him directly. The man who had betrayed my trust and fathered my daughter deserved to face the consequences of his actions. As I arrived at his upscale residence, memories of our shared past flooded my mind. Lester had once been someone I admired, a friend I trusted implicitly. Now, he was the source of my deepest pain. The confrontation was brief but cathartic. I didn't hold back, releasing years of pent-up anger in a single moment of raw emotion. Lester, for all his charm and intellect, couldn't offer a defense that would undo the damage he had caused. Driving home, I felt an unexpected sense of closure. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to navigate. The betrayal had left scars, but it had also given me clarity. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope for the future. The day after serving Patricia with the divorce papers, I braced myself for the fallout. The house felt eerily quiet. Patricia didn't come downstairs that morning. I had expected anger or defiance, but instead, I was met with silence. I spent the day reflecting on what came next. The divorce papers were only the first step. The life I had spent decades building was dismantling piece by piece. Friends, family, and even my children would soon learn the truth. I didn't care to control the narrative anymore. It was exhausting to play the stoic husband while knowing how deeply I had been betrayed. Later that evening, Margaret Barker called Patricia. It was clear she had learned of the divorce filing and my plans to meet Lester. Her presence at our house the previous weekend had been an attempt to dissuade me from going down this path. Margaret's understanding of the situation, however, was far more forgiving than mine. She had chosen to stay with Lester despite his infidelity, rationalizing it as a mistake of the past. For Margaret, preserving the family had outweighed confronting Lester's indiscretions. But I couldn't follow her lead. Patricia's betrayal wasn't a mistake, it was a deliberate choice that spanned years and left me with another man's child to raise. Margaret's attempts to reason with me during her visit fell on deaf ears. She pleaded with me to forgive Patricia, citing her own ability to forgive Lester. But Margaret had known about the affair when it happened. She had been given the choice to confront it then and chose to stay. I, on the other hand, had been robbed of that choice. When Saturday arrived, I drove to Lester's house, my emotions a storm of anger, betrayal, and anticipation. Margaret greeted me at the door. Her demeanor was calm but cautious, as if bracing herself for what was to come. She led me into the house where Lester waited. Lester stood as I entered, his expression one of forced composure. I could see in his eyes that he knew what was coming. For years, I had considered this man a friend, a brother even. We had shared fishing trips, family vacations, and countless conversations about life and ambition. Now, all I saw was a man who had betrayed me in the worst way. I didn't mince words. I laid out everything, the affair, Elizabeth's paternity, and the years of deception that followed. Lester tried to respond, his voice tinged with regret, but I wasn't interested in his explanations. The anger I had suppressed for weeks erupted. In a moment of blind rage, I acted on impulse, delivering a swift kick to his groin. Lester collapsed to the floor, writhing in pain, his cries echoing through the room. Margaret rushed in, her face a mix of shock and concern. I stepped back, the adrenaline coursing through me beginning to subside. The scene before me was surreal, Margaret kneeling beside her husband, comforting him while casting wary glances in my direction. I reached for my phone and calmly called 911, reporting an accident at Lester's residence. Before leaving, Margaret stopped me. Her grip on my arm was firm, and her expression had softened. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. It wasn't a sentiment I expected, but in that moment, it felt like an acknowledgement of the pain we both shared. Driving home, I reflected on what had just transpired. My actions were far from rational, but they were the catharsis I desperately needed. For weeks, I had been drowning in a sea of betrayal, questioning everything I had once held dear. That confrontation, however imperfect, marked a turning point. I returned home to an empty house. Patricia had gone to stay with a friend, leaving a note on the kitchen table. It was an emotional plea for forgiveness, detailing her regret and love for me, but it fell flat. Words couldn't undo what she had done. The next week, the divorce proceedings moved forward. Patricia signed the papers without contest, likely realizing that fighting would only prolong the inevitable. The house was listed for sale, and the division of assets was finalized. In the weeks that followed, I began to rebuild. Work became my refuge, a place where my competence and leadership were valued. The old man, my mentor and boss, announced his plans to retire, paving the way for me to take the helm of the company. It was a bittersweet moment, career success tainted by personal turmoil, but it offered a glimmer of hope for the future. I also began to reconnect with myself. I joined a hiking group, rediscovered my love for photography, and started venturing into the world of dating again. Surprisingly, news of my divorce brought an influx of support from friends and acquaintances, some of whom expressed interest in reconnecting on a deeper level. Patricia, on the other hand, seemed to retreat into isolation. Our children, Hugo and Eleanor, were visibly torn, caught between their loyalty to their mother and their sympathy for me. Elizabeth, however, remained steadfast in her support. She made it clear that while the revelation of her paternity was a shock, it didn't change the bond we shared. She was, and always would be, my daughter. The climax of this chapter in my life wasn't a single moment of triumph or resolution. It was a series of small victories, gaining clarity, reclaiming my identity, and taking steps toward a brighter future. Though the scars of betrayal would always remain, they became a reminder of my resilience and strength. The months following the divorce were a time of both healing and introspection. With the paperwork finalized and the house sold, I moved into a modest but comfortable apartment. The space felt stark at first, but it was mine, a fresh start. Work provided stability during this turbulent time. The old man officially passed the reins of the company to me, a position I had spent years earning. The responsibilities of leadership were demanding, but they offered a sense of purpose and distraction from the personal upheaval I had endured. My relationship with the children remained strained, though Elizabeth continued to be a source of comfort. Hugo and Eleanor, influenced by Patricia's narrative, viewed the divorce as an overreaction to a long-past mistake. I didn't fault them for siding with their mother, but their perception of events created a rift I didn't know how to bridge. Elizabeth, however, stood by me unwaveringly. She reminded me that while the truth about her paternity had been painful, it didn't change her love for me or the years I had devoted to raising her. Our bond grew stronger, and she became my anchor during the hardest moments. As for Patricia, her life took a different turn. The betrayal had isolated her from many of our mutual friends, and the divorce stripped away the comfortable life she had enjoyed for decades. She stayed in the same town, working to rebuild her life, but we rarely crossed paths. Lester, too, faced the consequences of his actions. The official narrative surrounding his accident was vague, but whispers of the truth circulated among those who knew him. His career as an appellate court judge continued, but his once unassailable reputation was now marked by scandal. The incident served as a reminder that even those in positions of power weren't immune to accountability. For me, the healing process wasn't linear. There were moments of bitterness and anger, particularly when I thought about the years I had invested in a marriage built on lies. But there were also moments of peace, quiet evenings spent photographing sunsets, hikes through the woods, and new friendships that brought laughter back into my life. Surprisingly, the divorce opened doors I hadn't anticipated. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years reached out, offering support and companionship. Some were divorced themselves, and their understanding helped me navigate this uncharted territory. Dating, however, remained a challenge. The scars left by Patricia's betrayal made trust difficult, and I approached new relationships with caution. Still, I allowed myself to hope that one day I might find someone who valued honesty and loyalty as much as I did. As I stood on the balcony of my apartment one evening, watching the city lights flicker, I reflected on how far I had come. The pain of betrayal would never fully disappear, but it no longer defined me. I had survived the storm and emerged stronger, ready to embrace whatever came next. Elizabeth visited often, bringing her husband and children along. Their laughter filled the apartment, reminding me that not everything had been lost. My role as a father and grandfather remained intact, a cornerstone of my life that no betrayal could take away. Life, I realized, was a series of chapters. Some were filled with joy, others with heartbreak, but all were part of the journey. Closing the chapter on my marriage to Patricia wasn't the end of my story, it was the beginning of a new one. To anyone listening who has faced betrayal, know this: you are stronger than you think. The pain may feel insurmountable, but it doesn't define you. Focus on what matters, rebuild at your own pace, and surround yourself with those who truly value you. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. Take care, and remember, your journey isn't over.